It's not ransomware when somebody abuses their police power as a representative of state government. And in the course of denying somebody not only access to due process, but the appropriate acknowledgement of the important role they play in national security, they allow themselves to be disproportionately advantage of theft, actual crime of theft by stealing from people and appropriating for their own personal use things that should otherwise be used in the service of the people, or things that are actually rightfully the private property of somebody else. In this case, it is another instance of somebody hacking into my work and stealing something that could have actually demonstrated not only a commitment to fulfilling an obligation that I agreed to take on myself, but also in a manner that aided and abetted acts of terrorism. Presumably, there are reports right now about a string of shootings that have happened in the last few nights. Well, this is a major weekend, a major clearing period. I've already explained this, I've already put this online. Somebody took a response that I did after reading an opinion from a former Attorney General of Texas on June 11th, and they stole it. Now, this has happened before. I've already acknowledged how twice I have done a review of a specific case, which, by the way, the implications are harrowing. The case of concern involved a named reference to an individual who happened to have the same last name as a man I once worked for, who was a child psychiatrist. And that case was about a Second Amendment argument. I reviewed that case. I reviewed a case that was pending before the court at the time I was working for that man in a administrative role while he provided services as a child psychiatrist. I reviewed it twice, formally, once in writing, and then vocally. Somebody just decided they would steal it. And the thing is it wasn't just a Second Amendment argument that I was making in perspective with that case. It was also how the Second Amendment and the 13th Amendment correlate, especially in consideration of actual charges and actual petition I have filed as a response and follow up to efforts to contact the court and go through the judicial process in connection with massive public corruption. Somebody just stole it within the last 48 to 72 hours. I have the notes. I reviewed it. I had the indicator, just like I have now, that my voice was recording at the time. And again, somebody decided to steal it. And this particular opinion happened to involve child safety by virtue of discussing specifically the role of ISDs and mortgage backed securities. And they stole it. And what's happened is the specific concerns I had are showing up on public reports, not only of events within the United States, but events internationally. It's absolutely 100% been used in acts of terrorism. And what happened last night? Well, last night was probably how they're trying to clear the tranche associated with all the illicit deals that they hooked up, including in connection with a process that is apparently incredibly grotesquely pornographic, intentionally pornographic, as a way to sexually extort people. It's a very concerning situation. How long do they intend to move forward on this specific element of the crime spree? You see, unfortunately, last time they stole it, a year ago, the Supreme Court of the United States announced they were going to hear a case specific to certain elements that were implicated in the arguments that were stolen from me. This has been going on for years. Somebody set up a completely different derivative process that was a complete misrepresentation of the actual charges and has been defrauding the people and, by the way, significantly undermining the capacity of the government to respond appropriately to a significant situation by allowing for a trajectory in our judicial branch that ends up reflecting on the crimes that are not being held to account as they are being committed by the legislature or the executive. This has been compounding. This has been compounding. Who would think it was appropriate to steal that? What are we dealing with, and what is everybody else dealing with in refusing to give me even someone to talk to? When you allow that kind of terrorism, not only against me personally, but that kind of terrorism to promulgate at large against society, because the actual stealing, that is as if you are removing a safety latch that protects you against being targeted. And see, this is the concern I've had, especially with their alleged mental health diagnoses of certain people that they were actually using in directed energy weapons development, as well as other kinds of weaponization paradigms. And they wanted to take away our capacity to have a say in the contract relationships with which we were engaged and in which we engaged. So somebody else could claim us as their property and claim what we do as their property, in effect, violating our 13th Amendment and then abusing the state police power they have as a representative of government to make us their personal weapon in some form of not even vigilantism, but extrajudicial assassination in acts of terrorism that are supposed to provide a form of liquidity to cover up for their very bad gambling habit. Right? And more often than not, what they like to do is leverage the safety of actual children. They will actually extort you into agreeing to leverage the safety of children. See, I have the notes, the written notes I did prior to presenting the formal response. But then I'm like, this is another attempted extortion. What did I do? Most of yesterday and last night, they were running some major transaction connected to my time as a teacher. They should not have even been able to do that. That should not have been on the table because they already had what they needed. The problem is, they had absolutely no intention of doing anything except committing acts of terrorism. Well, who do they think that they're demonstrating for? Who is it that hears this, and I can hear you, and feels like for whatever reason, the status quo in allowing things like that to keep happening recurrently is preferred to any other alternative? I asked this last night. Who are these judges? Who are these members of the legislature? Who are these financiers and these bankers? Who are they that when they think about the people and they think about themselves as a member of the public, which every single one of them is, that their understanding of what needs to be reclaimed is to create a certain level of crime to dissipate via quantity what they're trying to offset via quality. What it ends up doing is putting more pressure on all of you to become a gangster thug yourself. And you can't kill enough street hustlers in order to actually cover the stakes you're gambling with. How many of these shootings that have occurred have hit victims that were in a public school at the time that a school bond for that specific district was issued? It's a very, very practical question. It should have been asked and answered 5 years ago. How many people that got shot or got killed in any of these shootings that have happened in the last 72 hours, how many of those people were a student at a public school during a time frame where a ISD or the equivalent was issued for the school district in which they attended? See, I already know that the interest served by refusing to answer that question, since I've been asking it for the last 5 years, are the people who stole this. I'm not going to repeat my recounting at this time.